some activities, we can unmute everybody. But yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you, everyone. I was chatting with Kim because she was the first one to arrive. And one of the things that we were talking about is just how crazy a time this is for everyone and how much the ground is shifting around us. And so I'm just really mindful of that. And what my thinking is, just to remind you all, how we thought through the design of this is that we would have 2 of these shorter sessions where we're introducing key concepts and ideas and thoughts to you. And what we're really interested in with this is to sort of get the juices flowing for you in terms of taking what really resonates for you from any of these ideas and feeling free to put it into practice. And then what we do after 2 is we have a scheduled much longer time where I'll just sort of recap some of the key things we've covered in the last 2 sessions, but really save the lion's share of the time for you as teams to then reflect on that stuff together and figure out how and to what extent you can take what we've shared and apply it in advancing the work of your collaborative, knowing that the ground around you is shifting all the time. So particularly because y'all just celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day, do want to take a moment and catch a breath and ground myself and invite you to do the same on the land where you currently are, and take a moment of reflection to acknowledge all the Indigenous peoples, generations of whom have been keepers of the land where you are. And as settlers, how can we continue to bring their wisdom and their knowing forward and braid it together with our own as we move forward. So really what I'd like to do is unpack for you today what we mean by this concept of collaborative leadership, and offer you a chance to sort of step back and take a 10,000-foot view of where your collaborative is at, what strengths and assets you have, but also begin to sort of really see what the patterns are around some of the new realities, and give you some breathing space to reimagine what your collaborative's work and planning needs to look like now. And then talk about how you can work and share some tools and ideas for adapting that strategy so that it isn't just marching forward because you wrote it on a plan a year ago, but is really kind of attending to and responding to what's happening in the broader environment around you. As always, just wanted to reground again. We at Tamarack see collaborative leadership as one of 5 practices that we believe to be core in advancing lasting community change. And of all the 5, in a paper that our co-CEO Paul Bourne wrote, acknowledged that often the leadership piece is the most personal. And it really encourages us all to really reflect on what are you bringing and how are you showing up to this community change work. And really, for me, re-emphasizes the critical role that a host plays in inviting others in to be part of a collaborative journey. So again, reach out. I actually should say that I have on my website, there's an opportunity where people are welcome to just book a 15-minute coaching session at no cost, just to kind of follow up and think through ideas in terms of your own work. And I'd encourage you all to take advantage of that if that's helpful to you. So really, if we're rooting in this work of community change, which each of your 5 collaboratives is very much focused on, what we know clearly is that this kind of change requires an interconnected network of leaders. That notion that many of us have grown up with of leadership being one hero on a white horse coming in to save the day is less and less relevant in the nature of the kind of change that we all are working toward, partly because of the level of complexity that that's playing into some of the issues we're wanting to address. And different leaders have access to different levers and different insights, different funding streams. And so it's really when we can create a table that allows these leaders to come together, and frankly gives you all a gift when you're at that table, that you're not running 110 miles an hour trying to deliver your current service, but really seeing that time when you're together with the other leaders as that chance to step back and take that 10,000 foot view and really kind of think about can we give ourselves permission to stop doing for now? What new things is the community calling us on to do, and how do we make that happen? We also need to continue with the deep community engagement work. And part of what I've loved about learning about the work of the 5 collaboratives and the groundwork that you've laid is that there is deep connection in with the voice of community. And that is a real critical asset, and it's frankly essential in helping you to come up with new plans and strategies for making the changes that you want to see happen. And for me, as we talked about in the last webinar, also the whole community engagement thing for me is also about engaging in dialogue around the issues and opportunities for action. It's not about going out to community like you have the answers, because I think that's where we sometimes stumble. But it's counterintuitive. I get that. It's hard to imagine going out and engage and participating in a community engagement session when you have questions but you don't have answers. Really, helpful to think about collaborative leadership as that opportunity to really intentionally engage with others in innovating and evaluating new results. And finally, it's really about embracing that sense of we're going to do with folks in the community, not doing for, and the critical need to have both the subject matter and the lived experience experts with you at the table. My colleague Liz Weaver wrote this really great paper a couple years ago where what she did was she started mapping out all the different styles and approaches to leadership that are written about in the literature, and really put it on this graph, which I find helpful, because her overarching conclusion in this paper is that each and every one of these leadership styles and approaches has contributions to make in the kind of work that you're trying to do to advance your collaboratives. And it's really about knowing and understanding when to draw on what types of leadership to advance the work you're trying to achieve. So, obviously, very individualized is grassroots civic, engaging content and context experts. When you're working at the community level, it's creating those collaborative tables that allow those diverse partners to come together and see the landscape together in a different and new way. When we're looking at issues of complexity, there is no one right answer, as we've discovered. And so it's about how do we practice borrow some of the wisdom from adaptive leadership and pioneering leaders, and really start kind of pulling on the wisdom that they offer. And then lastly, in the top right quadrant, it's really about not just paying attention, as we've talked about earlier, to programmatic solutions, but also encouraging ourselves to think about system level change that needs to happen, and what our role as a leader is in terms of being a catalyst for that kind of change. In addition, Liz really pulled out from that look at all the rich different approaches to literature, the 5 practices that echo true across all of them. And for each one, I've offered you a little quote to kind of bring that to life. But the first is, you got to put the people that you're working toward and with central in the decision-making and the design. The importance of working across sectoral boundaries, looking across geographic boundaries, language boundaries, all the different boundaries that we bring to this work, and that paradox that you have as a facilitator of this process to both slow the conversation down and unpack some of that stuff, while at the same time really encouraging people to focus on what can they take action around. How important it is to not wait for perfection, but to catalyze and try new things, watch what happens, amplify the good stuff, put new strategies in place to dampen some of the unexpected and unintended consequences that we don't like, but keep continually moving forward and evolving, and really strengthen and support one another to look at the whole system, both within and across. And what can we do? What are our strategies that really tend to that? And lastly, it's about courage. You know, it takes, you're trying to put in place a new way of thinking, a new way of acting. And it's always safer to go back to the familiar, even when we know that the familiar doesn't produce the kind of results that we're looking for. I mean, if there is a silver lining at all for me and this COVID-19 cloud, it's been about watching the incredible innovations that individuals and communities have kind of just pulled together as an immediate response. And the importance of really noticing those and asking ourselves, what of these new approaches that no one would have thought of before are really things that we should think and talk about keeping going even after the immediacy of the crisis is done. I'm a big fan of the work of David Crislip, and he has been part of Tamarack's own learning journey for some time now. And his just fundamental belief in what's possible when you bring people together in constructive ways with good information, and really trusting that the process, if and when designed well, will really help to catalyze positive, authentic visions, passions, strategy. And really, if I think about you all and the roles that you're holding around these collaboratives, you are people who can really help play a role as host to bring these conversations forward and give us all permission maybe to pause and reflect on what's needed right now. I may have shared this with you in the past, but also just want to really help you to appreciate one of the strengths of the collaborative frames that you've embraced is this notion of 3 innovators. So this fellow, Alec Bansky, looked at 100 years of social innovation in Canada and looked at no shortage of good ideas, but not all good ideas took root and blossomed into big scale change. The ones that did, he found actually often involved a partnership between these 3 types of innovators. The passionate amateur, who is the person motivated by love. It is their child that's affected. It's their loved one who is struggling. They're the ones who, because of that love, are ready to take on the system and call for the status quo not being good enough and call for change. But alone, they are not as effective as they can be when they are linked with a bridging innovator. And the United Way network for me really is a great example of bridging innovation. So these are critical intermediaries that see what's going on in the landscape, see the pain of the disruptor, but then also bring them into a system and a process that enables them to formalize that angst into more action planning, opens doors and creates relationship and connects the disruptor to others, brings credibility to the disruptor's concern, but also challenges the disruptor to bring a more robust case forward, saying, I hear your diagnosis of the problem, but what's an acceptable solution? What's the change you're really looking for? I know that this is happening to your son or your daughter, but how many other people across our community is this affecting? So bringing some rigor and discipline to the disruptor as well. And the final partner in crime for a real lasting change effort is the receptive innovator. That's the closet rebel within the mainstream organization who knows the limitations of their existing approach, also sees how the landscape is changing and the need for new approaches, and is really on the lookout for opportunities and other players that they can work with across that organizational divide to help introduce new approaches into the system. And again, just that reminder that human ingenuity and creativity isn't a special superpower that only certain people have, but frankly, it's wired into us as a species. So for us as leaders of collaborative work, it's really about, can you create a good container, a good process that allows that human ingenuity and creativity to be unleashed? And it's holding that fine balance between process and learning and taking action. I think I've shared this with you at the earliest webinar that we did, but my colleague Mark Kabaj from Here to There Consulting really, I think, illustrates this well, where, you know, normally when things are flowing, you know, things are humming along, but then suddenly there's this huge disruption and we kind of fall down into a crevice. And then the challenge is, you know, what are we doing? What happens after this? And that time of uncertainty, do we go back to the status quo the way we were before? Or, you know, are we on the precipice of a new equilibrium? Or, you know, do we find our feet, but then find that we leap out, we get a tiny bit of stability, and then there's another disequilibrium that we have to navigate. And so all of those possibilities are, you know, are on the landscape, and the truth is no one knows. So how do you navigate that from a place of leadership? Really, it's about, you know, that first response is about mobilizing and addressing the immediate needs of safety and security. Really asking, what is it that your organization, your staff and your family and your community need? What are you well positioned to deliver? And what can you give yourself permission to let go of or cut costs, or thinking about how you can help? As the new crisis kind of settles in or passes, it's really an opportunity for pause. So, you know, what have we learned from this? What needs to change? What needs to stay the same? What new possibilities have we seen emerge that we really want to keep going long after the crisis is over? And then, you know, what's the core purpose of our work? And then how do we leverage our strengths, our assets, our capabilities? And what new partnerships might we need to think about forming to respond to the new environment that we find ourselves in? And then lastly, it's about, how do we strengthen the capacity of our community given what we've seen, and using that as well to help map out how we adapt our change process going forward. You know, it's interesting, I just read an article in my own little local paper that one of our big local employers, who's an ice cream maker, instituted a $2 per hour increase to people's wages during the pandemic in recognition of the added burdens and challenges. And just this week, they announced in the paper that though COVID, you know, was seeming to quiet down, they had made a commitment that they were going to keep that commitment of the $2 per hour increase to everyone's wages going forward and not take it back. Which, you know, wow, what a declaration of leadership, and a real invitation for others as well. So for you, thinking about your collaborative and its core purpose, what is it that you need to do? How do you revisit your purpose and check in with other players in your ecosystem to help you kind of determine what of your core work needs to stay in place, and what new pivots might you be called to be making in order to maintain your relevance and the relevance and commitment to the work that you're advancing. And then, you know, checking against your long-term strategic goals, and how do they need to shift and evolve to reflect your reflection on purpose. And then looking at the long term for, you know, what's the plan to sustain this into the long term. And obviously, if you are a collaborative, when you clarify your purpose and your value and contribution to community, that's going to invite for you an opportunity to also strategically take a look at who are the partners that you do have around the table, and are you maximizing their contributions? But also, it gives you a moment to also consider, are there new partners that you might want to more intentionally pursue, because the world has really shifted and changed for you. Your purpose may not have changed, but how you're going to get there may evolve. So, you know, how might might collaboration help an organization build on what they currently offer? How might you leverage an existing partnership in new ways? And how might you find new partners to fill emerging gaps? Who can you work with? You know, is it about creating an innovation fund of sorts that gives people a tiny bit of money to go and experiment on a new idea together? And so initially a new partner is brought on only for that one piece of work, with the potential of growing them into a much more long-lasting, deep partnership. And then the other piece around the FAR, I think for me, one of the questions that I've been certainly asking myself lately is, there are now so many collaboratives on the landscape. How well do we know about each other, and in what ways might we align around certain things so that we are mutually reinforcing a key message that is needed, or key strategies when and how we can. So that's just a repeat of this. I really like this tool. And I'm going to bring us back to the tool and offer us some time just to do quiet reflection around it. So I will come back to it, but really it is a matrix that invites you to think about the strengths and expertise you bring, looking internally within your own organizations, and where are there emerging gaps that you aren't responding to in this new environment that you might need to. And then looking outward as well, what else is needed out there in the community that your organization and or your collaborative is well positioned to play a critical role in, and also looking outward between your organization and your customers, right? So really looking at gaps. What are you seeing now emerging as a new gap? And how do you critically assess, is this an opportunity that you want to incorporate into your collaborative strategy or not, right? How do you have those discussions at the leadership level? So really, you know, it's what can we provide? What are we in need of? What are organizations that fit the profile of what we are looking for? And what is it we need to tell potential partners about our work, about what it means to join our collaborative, and who are people that we can reach out to for more information if we need more. And then lastly, it's about remembering, in the spirit of collaboration, that whole spectrum that we talked about. There are a range of different options and arrangements for you when you talk about collaborating with others. And not every collaboration needs to look the same. So just remembering that. So really, when you set out to engage different partners, if that's part of what you've identified you need to do in your work, I think it's really about saying, what is it, you know, what level of collaboration are you looking for with a new partner? What are you offering? What do you need them to know and understand? And where are your partners currently? Because the other truth is, in your collaborative, you might need to do a bit of a temperature check. Some of your partners may be struggling with things that they're assuming they can't bring to the collaborative table, but maybe they could and should, and they need the invitation. But also, you know, maybe some of the partners, because of what's going on, may not be able to fulfill their committed role in your collaboration in the same way. So doing a bit of a temperature check individually around how folks are doing amongst your collaborative partners is probably a great idea as well. And then lastly, you know, this is about opportunities to try new things. And here's a lovely roadmap, a 7-step roadmap that keeps it small and safe for trying new processes or new approaches. Try to identify the problem as specifically and tangibly as you can. I find when I shift out of theory and I'm looking at solving this issue in this community, it becomes much more practical and much more pragmatic, and that's the level you need to get it at. If people are only at the theoretical level, then you'll spin forever. You need to anchor it into something real. You know, really get clear on what's the question. What is it you want to learn or explore? What are some possibilities? And then what would have to be true is really a chance then for you to explore constraints and barriers. And then how might we test this out in a small scale, safe way? And then what are we going to do? How are we going to move that forward? And just get into action planning. So it's about how you quickly lead people through a shared thought process to move a new idea into something that can be tested with no commitment other than learning from the test to see whether we need it to continue. So there you go, really thinking about your questions. What do you want to prototype? How would you know? So I'm going to pause it there and open up the line for comments and questions from you all about what is this sparking for you as you think about the struggles that, you know, you're seeing in community and the work of your collaborative. Does this free you up at all? So I think you're all unmuted, so you're free to raise hands and let us know. Just questions, thoughts, what's sparking for you? Other than it's really early on the start of the week.
Me?
Yeah,
Oh,
Sarah, go ahead.
Hi.
Which Sarah are you?
You, Sarah Pullman.
Okay, sorry. Well, I don't know how online this is, but what keeps going through my head is that I'm part of another collaborative, just a community-based interagency partnership working on preventing ACEs, particularly in the maternal child health populations. And we kind of find ourselves at this point that so much of our membership and our core roles in the collaborative are missing because they've been redeployed to deal with COVID. And so we're actually at a point of thinking of like, well, how do we partner with other organizations in order to no longer, I mean, we're not able to sustain the work. So as we've been talking, I've just been thinking, yes, like about innovations, but also about like, what does it mean when you actually have to stop doing the work that you're doing? And it's just kind of a painful reality that we're in. So maybe others are in a similar place.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is words of a mentor who said almost every lasting change process he'd ever seen at a community level or is built on the ashes of at least 2 to 3 attempts at doing that work that didn't move forward. And I think part of it might be a bit of a reframe in terms of right now doing the work that your collaborative is doing is still valuable work, but the people, if right now, because the primary audiences that you've been trying to reach out to are so consumed in the crisis, they can't hear you. You know, it's legitimate perhaps to put a pause on things. It's also, though, I think interesting because I think the issue is so prevalent. So it might be about what, if you put the people that you are wanting to support through your work at the center, what is it that they need now that this collaborative might be able to contribute some value to? And how might you need to look at doing it differently because the landscape has changed? And I don't know what accountabilities you have to funders and things. But I would encourage you, if you are going to kind of rethink your strategy, and give yourself permission to go dormant and to think, more and, and look at revising your approach. It's, making sure that you include funders in that dialogue. Because others who aren't as close to the work can often see things you can't because your nose is to the grindstone.
Yeah, that's all good to think about. Thank you.
Hi, Marianne.
Yeah, we are in a similar situation where the COVID has taken the focus off the work we do. I really like the idea of helping collaborators realize they had an opportunity to look at that upper level and look down, because I think that's really important. That would be a kind of a link in some way of enticing them back. But the biggest group of our collaborative very active at the moment are our parents. And I just think almost a grassroots up, if they're the ones that are really feeling the enthusiasm for this, perhaps we should be using their enthusiasm to help enthusiasts make an approach to the other collaborators to be as enthusiastic. So my thinking is really that if we have got really enthusiastic families, perhaps they are the ones that can help the collaborators to realize how important this work is.
I think you got it. I do think, particularly now with lots of people by crisis having to be on the ground, the worm eye view, they don't have a space. They may not have a space for that eagle eye view, and we actually need both. Otherwise, we leap from one treadmill to the other, and we're not leveraging this disruption into our advantage the way that we could and should. If your parents are really strong and passionate right now, you're right, you go where that strength is. And what I would just encourage you is talking to individual parents, yes, but I also think your collaborative and partners could play a really important role in even bringing those parent groups together so that they can mind their own experience a little bit and speak with one voice. So each one of those parents will have had a different experience. And so it's not about just connecting them to their own individual story, but you need to connect them to the network of other parents. So they're speaking on behalf of their group. And that actually makes them a stronger voice at collaborative tables in their own right. Because then they don't feel tokenized, like I have to just draw on my own lived experience to share and inform. But I'm now part of a network of 15 families or 25 families. And these are the common things, even though each one of us has our own unique story about the impact. The things that the system, the collaborative partners need to hear is that these are the common issues and challenges. These are the opportunities that we as parents would love to see some action around. So I think it's a beautiful moment, really. And if they are passionate, grabbing those stories, even if you just do it one-on-one, but then someone does the work to say, what is the common message? What are the common messages that we are hearing? Because that is community change gold. If you could get consensus around that, and then that is a gift to the organizations, right? Because then they can sort of figure out how to be relevant and what to focus on and what to let go of. And if they're not connected in with the client the way you are, they would be really struggling to answer that question.
And something too that Marion, as you're speaking, just makes me think about the Sylvia, you mentioned the 3 types of leaders: disruptive, bridging, and what was the name of the 3rd one?
The receptive.
Right.
The receptive into the organization, receiving the innovation. Yep.
Right. Yeah. I just think that every collaborative has folks in those different roles, but I don't know that, maybe we've kind of identified those roles or thought through, like, okay, who are our bridgers that we can really lean into, or like, how do we elevate the voice of, the disruptors, and then who are the, oh my gosh, why is that word not sticking with me? The receivers, the receptive leaders, that we need to make sure are a part of the collaborative and are ready on the other side of that bridge, to kind of hear that information. And so I think especially, as Sarah and Marion have both shared, like in this COVID era, as just roles and resources are especially, just making sure that those roles are clearly identified and we can try to lean into them, even though I'm sure there's probably some overlap sometimes between roles, but really being able to be like, this is what I'm going to do, so that we can kind of hone in when we have few resources at hand.
Sonia, you wanted to chime in?
No.
Oh.
No? Okay. As I was listening to you, Elise, I was also reminded, another mentor of mine talks about the 3 innovators as well, but talks about them using different titles. And this might be helpful.
Yeah.
So he says the poet, the warrior, and the engineer.
Mm.
And he says the role of the poet is to translate private suffering into a public concern. And so who are the poets at your table who can take the individual suffering that you are seeing and elevate it up in a way that it becomes a public concern? So it's not that individual, but it's the pattern that that individual represents. And how do you speak about it with both head and heart?
Yeah.
The second key player is the warrior. And he would say that the warrior has 2 jobs. The first is to speak truth to power. And the second is to know when it's a good day to fight, and know when you need to keep your head down because you don't quite have all your ducks in a row yet.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it's like a gut check thing.
Yeah.
So again, who are those strategic, who are the warriors at your table? And then the last one he called the engineer. He said, well, that's really in some ways a legislator. And it's further down the road, but you've tried these experiments, whatever they are, and the ones that are very successful, you want people who are able to say, how do we shift, whether it's our organizational policies or our municipal policies, in ways that when the next generation comes along, they just think we've always done it this way. And they'll talk about getting it into the water supply. That's what they mean by that.
I like that. Yeah.
And so I like to think about that as well, because we don't see those things because we're in them. And yet somebody changed it up, right?
Yeah.
I always laugh. Has anyone ever heard the story about the young married couple who are hosting their first ever Thanksgiving dinner? And they're having 3 generations of the family come together. And when they come together, the wife says to her new husband, so could you just get the roast prepped and put it in the oven for us? So he says, sure. He goes running in, and she comes in a few minutes later, just as he's getting ready to do the roast, to watch him get ready to cut 2 inches off this perfectly good roast. And she says, wait, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? He said, well, you told me to do the roast. I'm just doing the roast. That's my job. I'm doing what you asked. He says, yeah, okay, but why are you cutting the 2 inches off the end? That doesn't make any sense to me. He says, well, that's the way mom taught me how to do it. So she goes to her mother-in-law and she says, okay, so can you explain to me why, because in our family, we don't do this. Why do you cut 2 inches off the end of a roast? And the mom says, well, that's interesting. I never thought about it. That's just the way Granny always did it. And I just did it too. So Granny's there. So they go and they talk to Granny. They say, Granny, okay, you got to tell us why. Why do we cut the end of the roast off? That doesn't make sense, does it? And she says, well, that's easy. My roasting pan's too small. Right? So she started doing something for a very, very practical reason, but now it's become part of our culture. It's this family's culture about how we do roast, right? And nobody even, it's in the water supply of that family. And it takes somebody new marrying into the family to ask those kinds of questions, right? Do we really need to still do this? No, we actually don't. We have a really big roasting pan now. We don't need this anymore, but we haven't given ourselves permission to stop. So I think there's that too, right?
Can that, I was wondering if
did you have some?
Yeah, I think I love your analysis and the example that you give made me laugh. So cute. I was wondering, when you have only one person in the group bringing those, but why do we have to do this way, how is that perceived on the group, I know myself, I'm always questioning the whys and what ifs, and I'm just wondering if in a group of people that are really already have a way of doing things, because you have so many agencies involved, about how can you approach that with a group with so many people involved, and they all have their own ways of doing things, and how to incorporate all those whys.
There's a couple of really, I'm a big fan of tools, as you know. And one of the reasons that I love tools is that they are a safe and easy way to make our collective thinking visible to everybody, right? There's a couple of tools that come to mind for me, because I think COVID, if there's a silver lining in it, it's really invited us all. It's given us all a moment and huge permission to hit a pause button and think about a reset, right? And I think in one of the sessions, I shared the 3 horizons tool. And I think that's a really interesting one, because it allows us to capture from all the different individuals what's going on right now that we really need to be aware of, like the current reality. Then you go to our aspiration, our goal, our hope, the long term. What is it that we're all trying to achieve together? And then it's really about saying, where are we seeing seeds of that future already brewing? And how do we lift those up? But if you were to bring that exercise forward to a collaborative table, the act of doing that work would help the wisdom, it would pull the wisdom out of the individuals and put it up in a format that you could all see it and then work with it. So I think for me, it's about, yes, COVID has given us a chance to do a pause, right? And now it's really about, how do we pull our collaborative together and use some tools or some exercises. Like, you could actually go back to that exercise with the quadrants that we just shared, and give people time to think, what we're doing is still so essential. What do we need to let go of right now?
I would appreciate any tools that help us address a system change, like Humber House has a big task ahead of us, to address this system change within the child welfare services, and how to improve that, especially for equity. And I will appreciate any tools that you have about how to approach that, especially with DCYF and child welfare services. When you come and talk about system change and how we can collaborate with them to influence what is happening right now.
Do you have in your network individuals and families of different ethnicities talking about that you could talk to, I guess? Do you have?
That's what we're trying to do, because
because I wonder about, like in that case, I wonder about even asking them questions about what are things you would change, or what are, are there barriers in your experience of the system? What were the barriers that were, that you think are most important to change? What are some enablers that if they had been present for you, might have made things different? And you're not going to hear right away what the answer is. But if your collaborative table could each commit to having 5 conversations with someone with lived experience, and or it's also equally important to have conversations with people working within the system, in the organizations, because they experience barriers too. And so even finding out where there's alignment between people who've had an experience of the system and people working in the system about what changes they would love to see and or what they think could make a big difference, and showing both sides that they aren't that far apart in terms of wanting something the same, then you can have a conversation about how could we do that? What could that look like? Could we do a little experiment, in one jurisdiction, in one county, in one city, and redesign it? Could we host a redesign event where you bring someone in who invites people into that conversation?
Yeah, that is a huge task, as you are talking about, and we already have a feeling, it's like how to approach that in a sensible way, and start the conversation. I think is the step 1 with them, and planning a series of system change, conversations, is something that we are thinking about. And but the main point is to increase the referrals that come our way for African American infants and Native American infants and their families. So those are the 2 goals that we had ahead of us, and just thinking about how to approach that. So that I like what you were saying about asking the people, but we first need to get the peoples and the clients, they have the experience, referred to us, so we can ask those questions. So
or you could,
but thank you. Yeah, we're gonna look into it.
You could also lean in on those partners that do have a relationship there already and ask them if they would, on your behalf, ask these questions and bring it back. That's one thought. The other thing is, it's important to also be clear about where are you strong, right? What do you already have that you're building from would be really important. There is actually an exercise that I have played with that you would have to take and adapt, but it's called a system leader interview. So you go and
How it's called?
It's called a system leader interview. And so at your collaborative table, you would determine who are the system leaders that you have relationship with and that are, and you prioritize them based on importance. And you just ask them for a half-hour conversation, and you ask them about where their pain points are. What are they struggling with? What is one change that they would love to see? And often if they could, what are the barriers that they experience in the system that get in the way that they would love to see changed? Or what are the changes in the human experience of people going through the system that they think are most critical for us to address, or if they could fix them, they would. And then, you know, and then ending it with, and who else would you recommend we should speak to? And so what you do is, amongst your team, you just commit that you're going to start each one of you with 5 conversations. And you keep a shared log of the highlights of those conversations, and you commit to doing it over a period of time. What you will start to see, the patterns aren't going to be immediately obvious, but when you've done enough of those conversations, that is rich information to help say, is there an appetite for people to focus on change? Because the issue you're working on is huge. And so what you need to be thinking about is, how do we narrow in on this huge landscape of possible priorities we could focus on? You need to have a rationale and a process and input that's diverse to help you say, you know what, we're going to start with this priority and this priority. And you feel confident in it because you've had the conversations with the system leaders. And that includes leaders within the family networks of lived experience.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, that's one tool that I could share, as long as you know that you're going to have to take it and adapt it, because it was the version I have is for a very different issue.
Thank you.
So, and one other tool which I'm going to bring to our working session actually is called the Critical Uncertainties tool. So we will work on that one together in our working session. And that helps you map different strategies for coping in different scenarios when you don't know what the future is going to hold. And when you do that and think that through, what you'll start to see again is the strategies that show up in more than one area are very good, safe bets, because no matter what the future holds, you know that those will be worthwhile. And then there are others that are riskier, but they might make sense in a particular context. But again, it's a thinking tool, which I'll bring forward. So I can follow up and share with everyone the system leader interview kind of guide and process, knowing that if you want to use it, it's going to take some work to adapt it to your own context. And then I'll introduce the Critical Uncertainties tool as a tool that you can use, and then you could take back to a collaborative table and invite them to think alongside you. Does that make sense?
Those both sound great. Thank you, Sylvia.
All right. Well, listen, I am mindful here that what I would love to do now is just ask you, if you wouldn't mind, from today's conversation, as we wrap up and prepare for the deeper dive sort of application of some of these ideas at our next meetup, are there some tools or ideas that you hope to take back from this session and bring to your collaborative work? And if you could take a moment and just type some of those into the chat box, that I think would be really, really helpful. So one idea, one tool that you would love to bring back.
And as you all are thinking about those and typing your thoughts into the chat box, the background for this final reflection question is really that, I was talking with our team, with Molly and Lark, about how we can kind of apply what we're learning here and continue the motivation around, building our system change muscles, and recognizing that it's a really busy time for all of us right now, especially as collaboratives. We're in the midst of refunding conversations and all of the reporting and stuff. And so didn't want to lose kind of the like tools and the knowledge that really pings you in these webinars. So hoping to have a list of things that you all found most helpful and most interesting so that we can follow up after kind of the refunding conversations are over, and people are able to kind of take a breather from that to come back to this and think through how do we apply it to our collaborative. So.
And our next session, which I forgot to put that slide on the end.
No worries.
Is, let's just pull it up so people have that date and I can put it into the chat box.
I believe it's Monday, October 20th. Nope.
It is October 26th. Beautiful. From 9 until noon. And so it'll be much more if your core team from your collaboratives are there, we'll walk you through some exercises where you're planning this out. Thank you, everyone. I hope you go on to have an incredible rest of your day.
Thank
you so much, Sylvia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
You.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. If we are going to play with the critical uncertainties tool, it will be an excellent one to play with. We could probably speed up the process a little bit if you and I huddled quickly and came up with 2 uncertainties that would be top of mind, that would resonate with all the collaboratives. So one end of the spectrum could be COVID is contained, COVID is not contained. That might be one end, what's the other uncertainty?
Oh, this is just, sorry, to make sure that I am like fitting the uncertainty to what the activity is. This is which activity?
If I think about the 5 collaboratives.
Yeah.
Right? Is there an uncertainty? Well, maybe this is teaching me that they have to go through the whole process. But what you do in this exercise is you think of 2 uncertainties, and the most pressing or the most worrisome you choose, and you create a matrix.
Yeah.
So if one of the continuums is COVID is contained, COVID is not contained, what's the other pivot point?
I wonder, I don't know if I know all 5 collaboratives well enough to pick something that would be universal. What do you think? Funding, I think, is big for all of them. Typical nonprofit. I'll have to,
you know what? How about I follow up?
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to send you the tool.
Okay.
As a slide deck. So you could sort of see the process that you would go through.
Yeah.
To apply the tool. And maybe it's COVID continues, COVID is contained, COVID is not contained is one that's universal. And then they need to think about individualizing what the other end of that matrix is for them.
Yeah.
But then what happens is, so say it was educational attainment, right? Let's just say that was our focus as a collaborative. What we might say is high school graduation rates are increasing is one end of the continuum. And then the other end of that is high school graduation rates are actually decreasing.
Yeah.
And so then what happens is you divide into 4, or you go, through all 4, and you give each one a snappy title. So if we're in a scenario where high school graduation rates are going up, but COVID is not contained, what's that scenario called? Describe what's happening. What are people thinking, feeling? And then what are the strategies and tactics that our collaborative would put in place to navigate that reality?
Yeah.
Then you go to the next one and you've got a situation where you've got education rates, high school completion rates decreasing and COVID not contained. What's that scenario called?
Yeah.
Oh, it's called blah, blah, blah. Okay, what's going on here? And what are our collaborative strategies and tactics for navigating that reality?
Yeah.
And then you go to the scenario where, you know, COVID is contained, but high school completion is decreasing, and or then you go to the next one, right?
Yeah.
And then what you start to see is that there's some strategies that you would lean in on in all four scenarios. And those are good because they're safe bets for you, because they'll work no matter what the future brings.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Others that are more tailored to a specific reality, but worthwhile thinking through.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I like the idea of, I think it's good to keep the COVID as kind of a constant one, and then maybe allow
them to pick another.
Yeah, allow them to pick another, because I do think that like a couple of the collaboratives are in some very unique situations right now that feel like they're taking up all their energy that, you know, other collaboratives would be like, well, that doesn't apply.
Right, got it. Okay, so then that's actually really helpful. That's actually really helpful. But I think it's a good tool because it allows you to think together, right?
Yeah.
And then what we did is we just used Jamboards because I was trying to do it on Mural and it got a little complicated.
Yeah.
But, you know, you label each scenario and Post-it note what's going on and what are our strategies and tactics.
Yeah. Great. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think so too. Because people don't want to feel frozen.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. And I will make sure that I do some good recruitment work before the next meeting. I know lots of folks.
Well, and I'm also open, like if you think we need to change things up differently.
Yeah.
You know, that's also like a conversation that we can have as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll do some thinking on it. I know that folks in general have kind of hit a limit for some reason, like now around like, you know, we've been in COVID for however long, and like Zoom calls and all the work, and like it's kind of piling up. So I think a lot of folks are just feeling tired. So
well, because if you want to shift dates around to give people more breathing space,
yeah,
that's a possibility. Like I'm open is what I'm saying. I mean, I've got other stuff in my calendar, of course, but
yeah. Okay, well,
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm just sort of thinking what's highest and best use of this for the people that need to have it, right?
Yeah, totally. I'll sound the waters this week and let you know.
Alrighty, sounds good.
Great.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, this was great, and I'll just wait.
I'll send you the whole shebang, like a summary of the chat box and stuff as well, and then we're good to go.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really curious to see the tool, the system
critical uncertainties.
Yeah, tool.
I love it, actually. I really, really love it.
I think that will be very practically helpful for the collaborative.
It helps you plan in different scenarios. Like it helps you kind of figure out what are the scenarios we're most worried about, and what's our plan for navigating each one.
Yeah, you know, I feel like we, even just as a team, like Lark and Molly and I were talking the other day about how we need to like really grow our skill set in kind of like rapid iteration, or like, you know, testing versus like putting all of our energy into like one kind of track, and then realizing, you know, a month in that we're like, oh, this was not the right track. We need to go down.
It makes me think there's a group in Allentown, Pennsylvania, sort of connected with Marcy. Do you know Marcy Reynolds, United Way of Allentown?
No, but I've heard of that United Way.
Yeah, so they partnered with Ryder Pool, which is a very locally based foundation, and it was really Ryder Pool that did a lot
Interesting.
they created collective impact fellows network.
Oh.
And so what they did was they tapped all the area nonprofits, and they chose 25 people who got their organizations got compensation, and they went on a 9-month learning journey.
Oh, wow.
Where they brought in different presenters on different subsets of content, but it was to build the network's capacity on these new ideas and new ways of thinking. They didn't necessarily have a collective impact project that they wanted people to focus on, but the other elements that they put in play, which I thought were really interesting, one was a rapid grant cycle process. So they recognized that people had to grow trust. So they would, they put a lot of attention into the dinner, the thinking together, the learning together, getting to know each other. And they were really good about selecting across different individual sectors and different organizations, I think.
Yeah.
And then once that cohort graduated, once a month they held their community of practice, which was a get together where all the previous iterations of that group continued to meet.
Oh,
and
cool.
what started to happen as people talked about the problems that they were facing in their respective organizations, they began to recognize at times they were actually fighting a common issue. And so then they had that $25,000 startup fund that they could apply to do a prototype. And there wasn't a lot of pressure, but it enabled them to have permission to carve out time to try and understand the issue and come up with a solution.
That's really cool. I like that idea. Laying first.
It's a challenge, man.
Yeah. Cool. Well, sorry, I won't keep you any longer.
No worries.
Thank you so much.
No worries. This is so good.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'll be.
You know what I'm realizing though, all of this is being recorded, and I should have maybe turned that part off.
Oh.